So some of the themes that they cover, well, there's class, obviously. We're looking at the level of workers' rights. People weren't allowed to go to, you weren't allowed to talk to people in a certain way. You weren't allowed to kind of look at them a certain way. You weren't expected to get, breaks and lunch breaks, and you wouldn't have paid lunch breaks. You wouldn't have paid sick days, all this kind of thing at the time. And then you were just expected to accept that. So you had the lower classes being treated a certain way, and that was just your lot in life. You kind of served and you worked, and you didn't have the kind of respect or treatment. You were there to serve rather than there to actually live a life as well, or at least that's how it's kind of painted to us now. And also, obviously, Priestley here, he wanted to say, this isn't right. Everyone should have equal access to, and that would include healthcare provision. At this time, some people, just because there wasn't like an NHS dentist, you got toothache, you actually died from like inflamed toothache. In some cases, or if you had a hernia, you just walked around the rest of your life with your hernia because you couldn't afford. There was no NHS to actually sort you out, as it were. So the onset there of the expectation of what different people in society could have was markedly different. And this is one of the things that Priestley was trying to get across, was that all levels of class should have rights and should have expectations of healthcare, etc. And also the hypocrisy, of the cast. We see like Eva, is kind of honest, hardworking. She shows kind of great integrity in not accepting Eric's money when she finds out that it's stolen. But then you can compare that to I think it's Judge McGarity, who is leching on a woman in that dirty kind of the seedy part of town, etc. And what's Gerald doing there? Question mark. It's just not really right for people who are supposed to have all these rights and luxuries and like standing within society to actually be able to do these kind of things. And so Priestley shining a light on that. So look forward to society as well, how it will be shaped, what society could be, or where we'll be if we don't change things, where the line is drawn. Are we going to just let Eva's death go into nothingness, or is someone going to be responsible for it? What are the consequences going to be? And obviously there's the idea of like promoting socialism against capitalism. So basically, you can look at this as Eva v. Berling in a sense, the kind of ideology that was put there. Obviously Eva's not championing socialism, just we're seeing it through her life that if she'd had more support and more equality, she can't just get sacked from a job just because someone who was a higher class than her doesn't like the way she looked at her. Obviously we're going to have a very different level of society. If you can imagine that actually happening. I don't notice things like that so much in England, but I remember one time being in America and seeing something in a store where one person of a certain class just literally asked another person their name, and all the people that served them, they just went absolutely silent, because as soon as asked the name, if it was reported, they'd be in huge trouble, and that was very saddening. But obviously different societies have it differently. Egypt and India, for example, completely more class-ridden than I think England is now, but that's neither here nor there. But although you can actually link that into, if you do want to do research on that, you can look into like different ways of society and strata society. If you want to look at a caste system for, say, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, etc., you might find an angle to bring that in. So one of the other themes is responsibility, taking charge of one's own actions and understanding the consequences, as some of the Berlings do and some of the Berlings don't, and some of the Berlings do and then regain on, turn on. Every character kind of has this throughout the book. In the play, every single one of them is offered a chance to actually change their ways and learn from it. But then the people who are in the upper classes are more set in their ways. They don't. Whereas the other people learn. There's the kind of direct information that they get, about the suicide and their responsibility. And for some people, that's enough to actually make them think, I've got to change my ways. So Eva says, I'll never do anything like that again. But then Berling, he's like, I'd give thousands to try and change it. But then as soon as he realizes it's a Bajingo fake or whatever he says, then he wants to turn back. It's just gone back to time. So he's learned and unlearned, and it's also kind of showing you what you've done and the consequences. And it's also really interesting learning the truth about yourself. You do have those arrogant moments, you do have those selfish moments, etc. For those of us wise enough to see it, or for those wise enough to learn from our mistakes, and then also seeing the truth of your loved ones. And this kind of works in both ways. When we realize that Berling's, Sheila must be so not proud of her parents when they just change back as if everything's okay, and then maybe even for Berling in some way, like looking at his son and realizing he doesn't know, and Miss Berling realizing they don't know their son. So there's a lot of kind of learning about self to go in there. Images as well, images in terms of how do we look to people. So basically Berling, obviously one of the main things that he's worried about is the scandal that might come out of this, whereas say Sheila doesn't really care about that. She wants, to try and make amends full scale, whereas Berling's obviously just worried about what the papers will say and how things are. And also even there's undertones in it when Mrs. Berling, as she says, with regards to important men having important business and you'll just get used to it. It's kind of just this acceptance in society that perhaps powerful men have affairs and they can get away with it and it's not really a problem. You can link that back to a Clinton case if you wish, but I think it's just an interesting angle to think about it and how things look to people, obviously, because when we start, everyone's like, Berling's like, well, I didn't have anything to do with it, and then we don't really see the chain of reaction that actually goes, and we have this whole kind of family neatly is involved with this woman's life, and also the idea of how do you want to be seen? How do you want people to actually remember you and look at you? I mean, I think this is most interesting in the case of Gerald. I think Gerald's the most kind of deluded in how he thinks people see him, and also how he kind of comes across. But the subtext there is, he's just one deluded man. He thinks he's doing this good thing when he knows there's no future in it, and he should be the more responsible. And he should be. I mean, he probably made Eva's life the bitterest, because whereas the others were cruelest to her, actually we'll come to this more in his character, but whereas the others were cruelest to her, he showed her kind of a zenith of life that she would never get again. She would never get again. There's not very many people like Gerald around, and then he dropped her. So even though the others kind of hurt her, I think that one hurt her the most, because she and in fact, the inspector said so much when she said she went away after that. It just kind of she'd never get again. Whereas before, she could deal with knockbacks, but to be taken high and dropped, maybe that's a lot harsher. So also one of the other images is change. How long do we change? To what extent do we change? How much is there? So obviously with Berling in that, Berling and Mrs. Berling, there's kind of a time limit that they change for, and then obviously they go back. And the extent is, Berling just thinks, well, if I could, I would. But obviously there at the end, when the inspectors found out to be not who he says he was, then there is a chance then to change, but obviously he goes back, so obviously that was very fake. The extent of that isn't very far. Obviously represents society, is society going to take this opportunity to change at this time, and then what's going to happen? And also kind of makes you think about what drives us, what's going to make us change. Do we want equality for people, or do we want our own kind of self-improvement, self-benefit, for us to kind of gather money and go? And again, you've got great insights into, if you look at different societies, I mean, if you compare say Finland, Norway, Sweden, with some of the more kind of classic European, world powers, like say the way China treats class at the moment, and obviously America. Again, there's something you might want to look into if you're interested in developing that far, or if you're doing something more than a GCSE on it. And obviously the theme is spirituality. Obviously, apparently Priestley wasn't a godly man, but he had a real conscience for people. And obviously, when I say he wasn't a godly man, that's not a judgment in any way. People can be moral with or without a god figure in their lives, of course, but obviously it's touched upon here because of the character that the inspector is. Is he kind of otherworldly? Is he godly? I mean, is he kind of prophetic? Is he from the future? Is it kind of a warning? All this kind of comes through from the inspector. Or is he just a conscience? Is he just people's kind of conscience brought to life? Some kind of sorry, that's my daughter. Some kind of spirit kind of coming through, just to show people the error of their ways and to help them improve in their lives, etc.